Today on The Nation Speaks, will Texans vote for independence? President Biden's pick for Commerce Secretary hits a roadblock, and why we shouldn't be surprised hackers breached a water treatment plant in Florida. Hello and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucare. In the Lone Star State, there's a movement afoot, and it's called Texit. And the people behind it believe Texas would be better off as an independent country rather than stay part of these United States. And just like with Brexit in the UK, the Texiteers want to hold a referendum on the question of independence. So we're joined now by Daniel Miller. He's the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement, and he's been advocating for Texan independence since 2005. Is that right?
Right, 2005. Well, the organization's been around since 2005. I've personally been at this since 1996.
Oh, wow. Okay. But now the Texas Independence Referendum Act was introduced into the Texas legislature. And I understand that the chair of the Texas Republican Party, Alan West, says he supports Texans' right to vote on this, which isn't an endorsement of independence, right? It's just an endorsement of having a vote. But it's starting to sound pretty serious. Can you explain to us where things are at?
Sure. I think it's important that everyone understand that much like we heard over and over during the Brexit debate, independence is not an act, it is a process. And getting Texas from being a state within the union to being a self-governing independent nation state is also a process. So what the Texas Independence Referendum Act is doing is essentially calling for a vote. Let's get the people's voice in this discussion. It's fully in accordance with the Texas Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, which reserves these types of decisions for the people. So, while Chairman West may not be on board with Texit, all we're asking for right now is a free, fair, full public debate on the issue that culminates in a vote.
So you describe in the act that it's capturing the imagination of Texans and drawing the ire of the political establishment and their enablers. So who supports the movement exactly?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is exactly what we have predicted time and time again, is that this particular issue of independence is a broad, bright dividing line. On one side of it are the political establishment, the elites that have that political elitist attitude that believe that Texans are just too stupid to make the decisions on their own. And then on the other side, you have the people of Texas. And what we have seen consistently through the life of our organization is that over the years, poll numbers have increased. And I tell people this all the time. We would not be pushing so hard for a vote on the issue if we thought there was any chance whatsoever that we were going to lose.
Okay, so let's lay it out for us. What are the grievances?
Well, we obviously are not going to have enough time to cover the grievances because there are so many. I mean, I think anyone who really takes an objective look at the federal system understands, and even those who are just caring about their daily lives understand at a very fundamental level that something is broken in the relationship between Texas and the federal government, and especially our citizens. But at the end of the day, Texans are really sick and tired of living under 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations administered by 2.5 million unelected bureaucrats. Texans are tired of going to the polls, voting for our representatives passing laws, and then having those laws overturned at the stroke of a pen by some unelected, unaccountable federal judge. Texans are sick and tired of overpaying $103 to $160 billion every single solitary year into the federal system. Texans are tired of having to wake up every single morning and worry about which right, which liberty is going to be encroached on by the federal government. We're sick and tired of having our way of life under attack constantly by this uncaring, disconnected federal bureaucracy that does not know our problems, does not care for our problems, and frankly can't organize a water drop-off during a hurricane. The federal government is inept, it is inefficient, it encroaches on our liberties every single solitary day, and Texans are ready to embrace the answer which is for Texas to become a self-governing, independent nation among nations, where our laws are made here and our government begins and ends at the borders of Texas, where our money can be spent according to our priorities, how we see fit, and spent in a far more efficient manner than the federal government ever could.
Okay, so everything you said, I could imagine pretty much any state or any American making the same case. So why do you think this case is being taken so seriously in Texas, or why is this movement in Texas?
Well, I think a part of it is cultural. Our history is one of independence. We have our own Independence Day, March 2nd of every year, which commemorates our Declaration of Independence from Mexico, where we fought against a tyrannical dictator who wanted to encroach on our rights and impose absolute rule upon the people of Texas. And so, there is a cultural thread running all the way back to the foundation of the Republic back in 1836 that says the Texans don't put up with this. I mean, we are the home of the come and take it flag. So Texans, it may resonate a little more with Texans, but we've said all along that, frankly, in every single state in the union should be having this conversation right now. And it really boils down to this. What we do is we ask the people of Texas to answer this question. If Texas was a free and independent state right now, in every respect, we had our own military, our own currency, we set our own policies. We were, in every respect, a nation among nations. And the question was being asked for us to join the union. Frankly, every time we ask that question of whether or not someone would vote to join the union, we have yet to run into anyone who would say absolutely they would. But think about it. What would that selling point be? Would it be the fact that we're going to inherit 180,000 pages of laws, rules, and regulations, or nearly $30 trillion in federal debt? And so at the end of the day, the question really that Texans need to decide on the Texit issue is, if you wouldn't vote to join the union, then why in the world would you vote to stay?
Well, I guess one answer to that, if we're going to look at Brexit, as an affinity case, if we're going to look to Brexit, there's a lot of buyer's regret now post-Brexit, because it's a messy, lengthy political process actually negotiating the exit. So do you have thoughts about how to mitigate that problem? What would the negotiation look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are some negotiated issues that are going to have to be addressed once this process kicks off. But, a good bit of the Brexit morass came through the complications that they had as being part of the European Union. But more than that, these politicians in the UK that longed in their heart to continue to stay in the European Union. The buyer's remorse didn't come from the people. The buyer's remorse came from the losing side of that debate. And that well-entrenched political establishment that had no problem enriching themselves off the UK's relationship with the European Union and having the sovereignty of the UK sucked into Brussels. So, are we going to have issues related to transition and negotiation? Absolutely. But, given our natural advantages here in Texas, if Texas can't make it as a self-governing independent nation, then who can?
Well, some of the buyer's regret or buyer's remorse was on the public side. I think a recent, in December anyway, YouGov poll shows that 10 to 13% of the people who voted to leave now regret it, think it was the wrong choice. So, and I would assume that most of that is because it has been such a messy process.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has been protracted, but the fact of the matter is, I am not entirely convinced that those polls, especially the YouGov polls, were even remotely accurate during the Brexit debate. I mean, let's be honest. The only poll that actually accurately predicted the outcome of the Brexit vote was one that was conducted by Leave.eu. So, while people may be subjected to the whims of the day and the frustrations of the day, I would posit that the vast majority of people in the UK right now are extremely upset at the European Union's digging their heels in and still trying to keep their claws into the UK. The fact is, Brexit meant Brexit, and the politicians were, they basically had to horsewhip their politicians to get them to deliver on Brexit. So, this idea of somehow that there's some regret, and we're literally 6 weeks into everything being done, I think is a bit premature.
Fair enough, and we certainly know polls aren't fully to be trusted these days. What if other states want to join Texas? Any interest in that?
Well, look, this is not the way that the union is. The union is a union of 50 independent sovereign states. At least it's supposed to be. So Texas is going to have to make its decision. Oklahoma will have to make its decision, and on and on and on. But at the other end of that, there's no necessity for us to enter into another absolute political union. We're not looking to form United States version 2.0. What we see around the world are independent, self-governing nations that are able to trade with one another, transact business with one another, travel between one another, without subverting their sovereignty to some supranational body. That's ultimately what we are looking for, whether it's with the remaining United States or any states that decide to follow Texas' path into self-government.
So do you think now that there's Democrat-controlled House and Senate and White House that Texas has a better chance? Maybe they'll be happy to have this big red state leave?
Well, I can imagine the Democrats might be happy, but look, Texans are rightfully nervous about what's happening in Washington, D.C. now, even more so than before. I saw these establishment politicians taking to social media after Biden was sworn into office, congratulating him. And the whole time I'm thinking, look, this man just literally crisscrossed the United States, promising neo-Marxist policies that would make Karl Marx look like Rush Limbaugh. And a lot of those are targeted specifically at Texas. I mean, they made a point to talk about how those policies would affect Texas. For example, trying to crush the energy sector. I feel like most Texans do, that if a man just spent a year going around telling everyone with a pair of ears that he was going to burn my house down, I'm not going to be really happy that he just got a can of gas and a pack of matches.
All right, so we're going to have to wrap up shortly, but can you just recap for us where this is at? It's in the legislature. What has to happen for this to actually go to the polls?
Yeah, it's again a process issue. The legislation has been filed. It's got to make it through the normal legislative process here in Texas. If it does make it through that process, then ultimately where we're going to see ourselves is we're going to see ourselves in a vote for Texas independence in November of 2021.
And a yes vote would start the process of negotiating. Is that right?
Absolutely. What happens is that once the people of Texas go to the polls and make their decision known on this issue, then immediately what the bill calls for is the formation of a legislative committee made up of both houses of our legislature to begin to formulate a transitional plan and just lay out all of the specific issues that are going to have to be resolved to get us from State of the Union to independent, self-governing nation state.
All right, so do you think this March 2nd is going to be different from past years?
I imagine people here in Texas are going to be quite excited, but I will tell you this, that the passion behind this among people who would never even consider it before is higher than ever. And they are looking at our elected officials, our state representatives and our state senators to do the right thing and just give us the vote.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So what do the good people of Texas think about the prospect of being independent? We're about to find out from 3 regular Texans who've agreed to come on and share their views with us. Joining us now. Why don't we start with you, Abraham? Why don't you explain to us why you're on the fence about this? And then we'll see if the other 2 can convince you.
Well, first off, because I'm an American before I'm a Texan, but I love Texas. And I believe in a clear debate needs to happen. I believe that there needs to be a voice on both sides. I believe that in today's society, we don't have enough debate around issues. It's always one side over talking the other side. And I think every issue needs to be debated properly in the public square. I totally support a non-binding resolution so that the people of Texas can go ahead and make their voice heard on the November ballot. But I do not believe that it would have to be a binding resolution. It's something that can still be discussed. Our representatives represent us, and given I don't have, an investment one way or the other in whether it's Texit occurs or does not occur, I'm very open to hearing everyone's opinions and trying to convince me one way or the other.
All right, Steve, why don't we move to you? I understand that you used to be pro-Texas, and now you don't think it's a good idea. So let's hear your thoughts.
Well, I think it's around the safety of not just Texas, but the country. Because the reality, I think, is that let's say we secede tomorrow, whether it be tomorrow, next week, next month, it really doesn't matter. Because at that point, we're immediately separate from whatever defense system the United States has. Originally, I was saying, you know what, the people in D.C. can't get their stuff together. We've just got to go. It's just that simple. We have a constitution. It's been good all these years. Let's just tuck tail and run. I didn't say it that way, but that's what it ended up being. Let's just tuck tail and run, and we know we can do it better. Look at Texas. We're successful. We've been successful for seems like forever. Let's just do it. But the reality, again, is that as soon as we become separate, we now have Mexico at our southern border. We've got now the United States, whatever power it has. Not that they immediately become enemies, but they can. We successfully have a relationship with Canada. But who's to say? I mean, the fact that we're leaving or wanting to leave Texas would, make them our enemy, ultimately. And we don't want to do that. We'd like to keep the United States as our friends. And I think that there's some salvage things we can do if we could just way to get back to where America was supposed to be at its founding. I think that the fact that as soon as we become separate, it opens us up to China. It opens us up to any other foreign invader because now we don't have the United States backing us. We've only got us. And if we're by ourselves, there's a heck of a lot more. Well, Texans have guns. Yeah, we do, but we don't have the United States worth of guns. We may even have most of them, but there's nuclear weapons. No, it's just not. I don't think it's a feasible idea in the big picture.
And you're a veteran, so it makes sense that you're thinking from the security perspective.
Certainly.
All right, and Allie, what's your case for leaving the United States of America and going independent?
So I think today, we have a different government, a government that's completely antithetical to anything that America stands for. Our Constitution has been canceled. We don't, as far as being a Texan, I moved to Texas 3 years ago, and the reason why I came here was because Texas does stand for American values, American principles, and I don't believe that our federal government, that Washington stands for the people's values anymore. And I knew that this was happening. I saw it was happening, and that is why I moved from California to Texas. I wanted to be in a safe place where I believe that the state government was responsible to the people, and Texas, more than any other state, I believe stands for that. I also don't believe that Texit. So Texit is the referendum that Kyle Biederman, the HB 1359, that he brought forth. And Texit is not secession. TEXIT is not secession. It's just seeing how people are going to vote, how they feel about it. It's the conversation, the dialogue. I think it's really important because we're losing our country. And just because this has never been done before doesn't mean we shouldn't. In 1776, that had never been done before either. And that doesn't mean you don't go for it. I don't believe that it's just going to be Texas seceding, or I think it's going to be a coalition. There's 31 red states, and I think that we're going to have at least a coalition of 15 other states that will join us. So I don't think it's just going to be Texas. But you know what they say, don't mess with Texas. Texas is the 9th largest economy in the world. I think Texas, we have so many militias. We are able to make a border wall, and Texas is going to be responsible to the Constitution. And Texans have shown time and time again, when they brought the case to the Supreme Court against the election, many other states joined in. There is a movement in this country for breaking away from CCP. We are right now being run by CCP. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are pretender rulers. They're pretenders. They stole the election, and they were bought and paid for by China. And we're not giving in. We're not surrendering.
I see. Okay, so you're seeing this as a not political necessarily, but red state, blue state kind of potential division. So let me ask you, Abraham, hearing the national security or the security argument, and then the prospect that maybe this isn't just Texas, it could be something bigger, at least that might be on the minds of people that vote for it. Do either of those things make you feel more or less inclined towards Texit?
Well, if I just have to go on the debate that I just heard, which I would never do, there's a lot more information that has to be shared. I would not lean towards Texit based on a lot of fear mongering that has been in the news recently. There's a lot of emotion right now, and people emotionally respond to what they're reading about. There's a lot of false or fake news out there, both on the right and on the left, and people buy into it. And I believe that the United States will eventually just stay down the middle of the road. We've had a federal branch that has flipped back and forth in my lifetime. All the way back into the 70s, we had from the Carter to Reagan and Bush to Clinton to Bush again to Obama to Trump. And right now we're under a Biden-Harris administration. This may flip back in 4 years. So making a decision like this because of the current fear and the hyper narrative that's occurring and echoed because of social media, I think is a terrible decision to follow. I think the debate needs to happen by cool heads that aren't buying into the right or the left and discuss the real positives and negatives that could occur around Texit. I do believe that people's voice needs to be heard, as I said earlier, in a non-binding resolution, but I don't believe that making rash decisions based on social media articles that you're reading about that are unfounded in many cases on both sides of the narrative are any good way to run a country or make a decision.
Can I jump in? I think that is totally unfounded and totally unfair, that just because I have an opinion based on real facts, that it's fake news. And that's why Texas doesn't want to be a part of the United States of America anymore, because we don't want to be, or we want to be old America, what America stands for. We don't want to be run by social media. We don't want to be run by Twitter. Don't want to be run by Facebook. We don't want to be run by Jeff Bezos. What you're saying about fake news, to tell me what I believe and what I've researched is fake news, is not wanting to have a dialogue. So to say on one side of your mouth, and I'm not really criticizing you, but what came out of your mouth, to say that you want to have a free and robust dialogue, but you want to shut the other person up by saying what's coming out of their mouth is fake news. So you can't argue with my opinion. My opinion is my opinion, and I might not be very articulate, but there's a whole lot of other, Texans and people in this entire country that aren't happy with what's going on. And it's not fear porn to say we're being run by the CCP.
So
I don't believe that I accused you of anything, and I don't believe that I said fake news was coming out of your mouth, but it is coming out on both sides, on both extremes. There are extremist opinions.
you did mention, both sides of the aisle. Let me just ask, Steve, let me ask you, are you in favor of having the open dialogue, or do you think we shouldn't even go to a vote and have this debate?
I think open dialogue is probably one of the most important things, because I think part of the problem we have is that we're literally only hearing one side of the argument, mostly because the side of the argument that has the power to give the argument are the news stations that are on one side of the argument. If we were able, we've got Newsmax now. We had Fox News that would have, oftentimes tell the other side of the argument, but most people are looking at ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, and even CNBC nowadays, and you don't really see both sides of the argument. So if we could actually have an open dialogue, it might convince some people who were otherwise leaning in the direction that the common media, as I like to call them, would tell it. The opportunity to change their mind and maybe look at some facts, as opposed to just and that's on top of the Facebooks and YouTubes and whatever other social media platforms there are that block the other side of the argument, claiming that those arguments are what they call them, fake news. If we could find a way to have those conversations, and the Constitution actually affords us that opportunity, giving us the Convention of States. If we could just get back to the Convention of States to allow us to come together and decide what we really believe as a country, instead of saying, you know what, we're going to let CNN or like someone said earlier, Bezos decide what it is we're going to believe as a country. That's silliness. I mean, having that much power to one person, or even Congress, unfortunately, in 2021, giving that power to those guys who have squandered it for so long doesn't make as much sense as giving it back to the people where it originated and where it was intended to be in the first place. If we could just have the Convention of State and say, hey, what do you guys really think? Do we want to do something new and strange and crazy, or does the population of the country want to go back to the principles that were in I can't think of the word now, in the Constitution?
I was say that I agree. The best opinions are the ones you disagree with, because if you can't listen to the argument on the other side, then you can't make an educated decision.
So do you all think maybe
True
one
word.
last
Okay.
one last round to go around? Do you all think Texas can survive such a debate? Because if there is the debate, however it turns out, you're still going to have to live with each other, whether it's as a state or an independent nation. So what can you imagine the outcome of just having that dialogue so intensely looking like? Ali, go ahead.
Texas will
Oh,
all
go ahead.
Well,
I'm sorry.
think oh, that's okay, Steve. I think that the argument, and I think that the debate is going to be very difficult, but we're already in an environment of censorship in this country where one voice is allowed to be promoted and the other voice is not allowed to be promoted. So I don't think we need to worry about the effect of what it's going to have. But in our Constitution, we have the right to free and robust debate, and it's been taken away from us. So if it's going to, it's already Washington and the media and corporations and globalists have already shut down the dialogue. So why should we be worried about it in Texas? We're the last gasp. We're the last voice. And they say in Texas, come and take it. And I'm saying that about our voices too. You know what? I have my voice. It's loud. It's proud. Come and take it. But I'm going to speak up.
All right, and Steve, share your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think she's right. I think the reality is I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. No, I thought you were breaking me up. Sorry. But no. I think the reality is the same. We've been fighting at least since Donald Trump became president. We've been fighting just to talk. Never had I ever imagined America we would have situations where there would be people spitting and screaming at and disturbing for no real good reason normal everyday citizens simply for wearing a hat that had a couple words on it. No curse words, no offensive words, nothing absolutely abhorrent, just a few words. MAGA? Maybe even one word. It's not even a real word, but in the America of today, that's acceptable. It's insanity if we could just, again, get around the table, figuratively speaking, get around the table and discuss those fine points. I find that when I have private conversations with people, that they actually do hear it. People on the other side of the table, they'll hear it. But if they're not hearing it anywhere, they can't even consider it. Those things they can't consider. You don't know what you don't know.
And Abraham, how about
so
yourself?
Will we lose?
Oh, go ahead, Steve. Finish up your thought.
Will we lose civility in Texas? Seriously doubt it. Because again, we love each other first. As Texans, and we have a Congress that understands that Texas is going to be Texas. That's why it's even a possibility to have the conversation in Texas, because we know that no matter the outcome of the conversation, we'll still be Texans, and the buses run both ways in Texas, in and out. You can always, whenever you get ready, we'll take everybody who wants to become a Texan. Not anybody who wants to move to Texas, but everyone who wants to become a Texan. We welcome you.
And Abraham?
I have to agree. I have to agree completely. In Texas, we love our neighbors. In Texas, when we have disasters like Hurricane Rita, we all come together. Texans will always take care of other Texans, and Texans that disagree with each other put all of those things aside when they need each other. So this country, America, stood for something wonderful for 200 years, over 200 years now. We're in a time of strife where people are not getting along and people are attacking each other politically. Texas may become a microcosm of that over an issue like this. I doubt it. But in the end, we're all going to be standing up for each other and looking out for each other and taking care of each other and taking care of our neighbors.
Wonderful. Oh, go ahead, Ally.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
We have to, this isn't just a little, neighborly argument between states or between the federal government and Texas. This is about the life and the existence of our living Constitution. It's being taken away now at this very minute by the federal government, by our government, by our elected officials who are in full tyrannical flight from America. And so this is our Constitution. That's what this fight is about. This is about keeping the Constitution as a viable ruling document and not allowing it to be taken away. This is a true fight. And it's not just a fight because we don't like the Democrats in office. This is a fight for what gave breath for this country 245 years ago. I think it's a fight worth fighting for.
Anyone else like a final word? All right. Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
Sorry. No, I think I may have come across differently than I intended to. I don't want to, we talk about sitting around the table and discussing stuff, but after the discussion is done, there has to be some decisions that are made. There have to be. There have to be standards. You can't just say men or women, women or men, you can do whatever you want whenever you get ready. Who cares? Doesn't really matter. You can't do that. You've got to have standards. You have to have things in place to say, you know what, this is what we send people to prison for. These are the things that are okay to do. And that has to be okay with the majority of the people. But understand that there are morals in place. There are things that we, again, back in 1776, that our founding fathers put in place to make sure that those things stayed where they needed to, or were put where they needed to be put. If we can find a way to, the problem, I think, and forgive me for rambling on that point, but the problem I think we have is that it seems that people on the liberal side of the argument, would they say, let's sit around, let's discuss, let's see if we can come together, kumbaya, what they really mean is, you on the other side of the table, sit down and shut up and do it my way. As opposed to actually sitting down and saying, hey, let's figure out the best way to go forward. What has worked in the past, what definitely hasn't worked in the past, and why would we bother changing something that hasn't, that doesn't even need to be changed? If we focused on those things, I think we could figure out a way to move forward together.
All right, Abraham, do you have a last word? And then we'll close up.
Just to continue on that thought, it really comes down to what this next generation is raised to believe. And I think we all have to make an investment as parents with our children to make sure they're raised with the same beliefs and the same, moral structure and love of our country that we were raised with. And if we can do that and we can change the direction of our entire country, we can solve some of these issues where people aren't so hypersensitive and attacking each other at every corner. And it really comes down to the parents instilling those right beliefs and actions in their own children.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And I guess we'll see what happens in Texas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.
Coming up after the break, President Biden is having trouble getting his pick for Commerce Secretary approved, and it all has to do with China. But first, here's America Q&A.
My family, my animals. I try to get my dogs out for a walk every day, and this is one of the parks near my house where we like to go.
And family, friends, all those nice things.
The new government will hopefully have new plans for how we can change the government in the future.
My hope comes from my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Just being able to receive His grace and just know that He has a plan for me.
I think that now that the government has a plan of what they're going to do gives us a lot of hope.
This new vaccine that's coming out, everyone getting together and kind of being on Zoom, acting like everything's normal when it's really not.
Having goals in your life and being able to
achieve them and knowing that you can achieve them and working towards them.
What brings me hope is historically the US has always come through. I mean, this is not the first challenge.
People who reach the shores of America have reached here through a very strong belief and skill system. They've had to work really hard to come here. And so the character of the country gives me hope.
Joe Biden.
Strong and incredibly intelligent nieces.
God.
Actually, today's my anniversary. I've been married to my husband for 18 years today, and we have 4 kids together. And I mean, they're everything to me.
Waking up, seeing my family, going to work every day, and get home and seeing food on the table and know we're all contributing to the same factor, to be honest. Even though we didn't get a check, we got to make it through the week. So
what gives me hope is waking up and being grateful, I guess.
Life itself.
Positive outlook that I find in most people on this planet and every single day that I run across them, because people seem to think that everyone has lost hope. But if you do get out and you do interact with people, put the phone down and put the computer down and just say hi, you will see that most people are generally in a good positive outlook, and speaking with them, that's what I find.
A day like today where people are out being cautious but still they're living their lives.
Jesus Christ gives me hope. He's my creator, the foundation of my life.
Returning back to normal at some point.
Freedom gives me hope.
That's such a deep question. I don't, at the moment, right now, just trying to stay on path. Like, meditation.
The fact that we have people around us always, that's always the most important thing. Loneliness is something we always try to stay away from, and we always try to help people that feel that way.
Yeah, we just got engaged, so that gives me hope.
Everything. Plants, nature, sun, a smile of somebody, from somebody, anything.
Trends may be fleeting, but values are timeless. We now bring you this new clothing brand with classic design and luxurious comfort. It's our way of sharing hope and inspiration from the world of Shenyun. We bring you Shenyun Dancer. Wear it with honor.
Welcome back. One of the hallmarks of the Trump presidency is how tough he was on China. He surrounded himself with China hawks in key positions, including his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and trade advisor, Peter Navarro. In November, Pompeo called the Chinese Communist Party brutish, antithetical to human dignity and freedom, and a Marxist-Leninist monster. The Trump administration sanctioned CCP officials for human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. It banned U.S. investments into Chinese companies with military ties, and it convinced allies to block Chinese telecom giant Huawei from its 5G networks. So the big question is, how will the Biden administration handle its relationship with Beijing? And how much will Republicans press the issue? Well, we're starting to find out. Some pressure is coming from a member of the House Committees on Foreign Affairs and Armed Services. Joining us now is Representative Dr. Mark Green from Tennessee. He's not only a former state senator, but he's a physician and retired Army major. Representative Green, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show. Glad to be with you.
So President Biden's pick for Commerce Secretary is Rhode Island Governor Gina Marie Raimondo, and you joined about 20 other House Republicans calling on the Senate to hold off confirming her until the Biden administration can give a clear answer if they plan to keep Huawei, China's telecom company, on the Commerce Department's entity list. And 2 days later, on February 4th, Senator Ted Cruz did exactly that. He put a hold on Raimondo's confirmation hearing. Can you explain to us why it is that Huawei is at the center of controversy over this nomination?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me on the show. I think there are really two reasons. One, and perhaps the most important, is the security of America's information systems and our data. Huawei it's not necessarily a state-owned enterprise, but the CCP passed a law, their national intelligence law, in 2017 that requires every single company in China to share their data and their information, anything that relates to intelligence, which is defined by the CCP, with the government, with the Communist Party. So that puts all of our data at risk. We do know in the past that Huawei networks that have been set up in, for example, the South African Union, and there were some network stuff put in, Vodafone did, through in Italy, that resulted in devices being planted to gather information. So there's an issue of trust. There's an issue of their requirement to share that information. And then Huawei's and China's theft of intellectual property has given Huawei an incredible unfair advantage. You look at what happened to Motorola. We just think it's wrong to support a company that and a country that allows that kind of stuff to happen.
And so also earlier this week, Huawei launched a lawsuit in the U.S. Because the Federal Communications Commission in December had ruled that Huawei is a national security threat and blocked American telecom operators from dealing with Huawei equipment. So they're launching a lawsuit to try to get this reversed. How do you think that's going to play out, given signaling you've seen from the Biden administration so far?
Well, I think that really depends on the judge and their sensitivity to this sort of national security level stuff. I hope that the judge will dig into it, understand the threat that's there, and really understand what 5G is. I mean, it will allow information, the synchronization of information and data over the networks in an exponential fashion that's going to make, you think about Bido and the GPS system that the Chinese have set up, all of that information will go straight into those satellites. I mean, it's going to be an incredible penetration into our data systems. And it's just, considering the risk with China and the CCP, one we should not take.
So how do you think this is going to play out with the nomination of Raimundo? Because right now it's being blocked by Senator Cruz, and you're waiting some sort of clarification. So what if the clarification comes that we will consider taking Huawei off the entity list? And maybe you can explain about the entity list for a moment, too.
Sure. So I hope that Senator Cruz will hold on until they give not assurances that they're going to consider it, but assurances that they won't allow Huawei to be a part of those networks in the United States. That's really what we want to hear, and that's what the list does. The list has companies that can't deal with basically can't do business in the United States and with other companies inside the United States, protecting our national security.
And so President Biden also signed an executive order which sort of plays into this level of security threat, repealing the ban on Chinese equipment being used in the American electrical grid. Repealed it while, going to be considering, other measures. But right now, does that leave America vulnerable?
Absolutely. As many people know, you can actually run a network off your electrical system in your home. You can wire a network through the power grid in your house. So it's obviously a big concern for us that they're going to be putting equipment into, electronic equipment into our power grids and in our monitoring stations for power. So that's a big concern. And I don't understand why the Biden administration would prefer Chinese companies over American companies. That makes no sense to me. There are fantastic American companies, Schneider Electric being one of those, many, many others that should be getting that business. And these are our networks built by our co-ops and in some cases government service providers, utility companies. There is no reason to give preferential treatment or even to allow competition from China when we know, essentially they are our big competitor.
So why do you think the Biden administration took this move?
I don't want to speculate. I'll leave that to others for the time being. I just implore the administration to deeply consider reversing that opinion.
You pointed out in this statement signed by about 20 Republican House members, and you pointed out that there are actually a lot of Democrats who have also expressed concerns about the security threat posed by Huawei. Are you aware, is there cross-aisle conversations going on about Huawei going on right now?
Absolutely. We can have conversations. This is more of a whispers in the hallway, if you will. But there are a lot of Democrats who realize that the challenge that we face with China. And I just sat through Secretary Austin, but when I sat in the committee hearing with him, he was then, General Retired Austin, and he expressed that they are our pacing threat. Those were his words. China is our pacing threat. So very clearly, there are members of the Biden administration who get this strategic competition with China. So hopefully, those people are whispering in the president's ear, and he's listening.
Well, there are, words being spoken even by, in the confirmation hearing by Governor Raimundo. She expressed that China, is a threat, that we need to take it seriously, and yet unwilling to come out and explicitly say, yes, we will keep Huawei on the list. So how much confidence do you have in the understanding about the real threat China poses?
Well, I don't understand sometimes what the Biden administration does. I'll give you an example. They talk about being for the workers and for the unions, and they cut the Keystone Pipeline that destroys tens of thousands of jobs. I mean, they'll say one thing and do another. So I hope in this case, for the sake of our national security, that they're not speaking out of both sides of their mouths. But obviously it's something that I would be concerned about. I mean, I want to hear definitively that Huawei isn't going to be used in America.
And if you don't hear that?
Well, we'll keep pushing back and, draft legislation. We'll, wage a grassroots campaign. Our goal is to retake control of the House in 2 years so we can make sure that the damage they want to do doesn't get done.
And are there other key picks from the Biden administration that you have concern about, particularly in terms of the U.S.-China relationship?
So far, I feel like you look at the defense secretary. I actually served with Secretary Austin. He was in the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division with me. I was in the 1st Battalion of that brigade. He commanded the 2nd Battalion of that brigade while I was a rifle company commander. His reputation, very good. The comments that he made in our committee hearing that day stressed the things that we wanted to hear. So far, I've been okay with those picks. Obviously, here with commerce, it's concerning because those networks and the power grid, all that stuff is a Commerce Department issue. I'm just hopeful they'll be definitive.
I believe Secretary of State Tony Blinken also wouldn't commit to maintaining the entities list. Is that a concern?
Yeah, of course it is. The Secretary of State he's our diplomat. He's the senior diplomat for the United States government. We need that individual fully understanding what's going on and committed to protecting the security of our data. So that is concerning.
So as a military man yourself, what do you think are the biggest concerns over the next, say, 2 years that the U.S. should address?
Well, very clearly, I think the China issue is number one. We also have to think about China in terms of its Belt and Road Initiative internationally, attempting to drive a wedge between us and our friends. There are NATO countries, EU countries that have signed on to the Belt and Road. That's a concern. In Latin America, we've seen the commodity extraction from particularly South America create issues with their currency, and then the downstream effects on manufacturing and other types of economic impact in those countries. Obviously, also with China, the manufacturing issue for certain safety things like PPE and drug precursors. We have to fix that. Those are just a handful. We also have a need for things like infrastructure. We've got to fix some infrastructure issues in the country. So there's a very long list. We're going to have to overcome, the downstream effects to some of the, I think, COVID. Now we're going to do another 1.9 trillion. That's just more debt. So we have to take that on and figure that out. and of course, finishing up the vaccine distribution and getting the economy back open.
And just before we wrap up, since you brought up COVID, the WHO finished its tour assessment in Wuhan in China. They came back. I think you weren't very happy with the results of that. And Biden administration is also looking to rejoin the WHO. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the WHO is very clearly tainted by China. You know, Tedros was actually selected through a process where China influenced him becoming the leadership at the WHO. So there's a conflict of interest as far as I'm concerned. I'd like to see new leadership at the WHO. I will say you can't fix a ship, a sinking ship, if you bail off the ship. So we do need to be involved, engaged, and get the World Health Organization back to being an honest broker when it comes to world health.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Switching gears now, 2 days before the Super Bowl, about a dozen miles from the stadium, a hacker got into a town's water treatment system. The intruder increased the levels of sodium hydroxide, or lye, to more than 100 times normal levels. Fortunately, an alert operator noticed the change and dropped the levels back down, saving the day. Now the county's Sheriff's Office, FBI, and Secret Service are all investigating what could have been a public health disaster in Oldsmar, Florida. So what does all this mean for you and me? Here to give us some insight on that is Dr. Eric Cole. He's a former CIA hacker, and among his many other credentials, he helped write the Cybersecurity Guide for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and is the author of a soon-to-be-released book called Cyber Crisis: Protecting Your Business from the Real Threats in the Virtual World. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Let me start by asking you, what do we know at this point about the breach into the water treatment system?
What we know about the breach is that there were control systems that were directly accessible from the internet. They did not have strong passwords, and they violated one of the big rules, which is any internet-facing system should have read-only access. And in this particular case, the attacker was able to modify or change the chemicals, which could have had devastating impact.
And was that related in any way to remote working, or is that how things were normally set up there?
This problem was amplified because of the epidemic and remote working. Normally, these systems are in what we call an operations center that are not accessible from the internet, but these are very close quarters where people are working arm to arm and right on top of each other. So because of the epidemic starting in March and April, not just this case, but really around the country, they were allowing people to remotely access these systems. And this was not a one-off. This is the new norm. It happened right outside of Tampa, but this could happen anywhere else. And this is a big, big problem that we can't ignore.
Right, absolutely. So I'd like to get into that, but let me just ask you one other question. From your perspective, what do you think we saw here? Was this like a disgruntled employee, or do you think this is a bad foreign actor? What's your expert opinion on it?
From the information that we have right now, I think it was somebody that was trying to cause some problems, maybe interrupt or cause some issues with the Super Bowl, the sporting event. I'm not a big fan in cybersecurity of coincidences. So based on the location and where it happened and the timing, I think it was a local actor that just tried things. Unfortunately, it was very, very easy and very simple for them to get in.
And how much are these things monitored generally? Was it a lucky break that the operator noticed it, or do you think that was following protocol?
No, in this case, we got very, very lucky. There should have been automated systems that caught this. This should have been a basic anomaly detection that was able to realize there was a change from an unauthorized source and catch it. The fact that an individual just happened to be looking at the computer at that moment, we got very, very lucky, because what if that person went to get coffee, took a break, was in a meeting? Unfortunately, this could have had a very, very bad ending. So this was one where it was luck. We shouldn't count on luck for the future. And we need to recognize that this is a huge, huge problem in this country.
Yeah, we don't want to rely on luck for sure. So can you explain to us how vulnerable are our systems?
Our systems are very, very vulnerable. When this story broke, unfortunately, I was not surprised because even before COVID in 2018 and 2019, our critical infrastructure, whether it's water, oil and gas, even nuclear, was very, very vulnerable. And many security professionals, including myself, started raising concern. Unfortunately, with the different events that happened, Congress is always focused on other issues, and cybersecurity is always number 2, number 3, and it never gets the attention it deserves. And then, of course, with COVID, it amplified. And then, of course, everything that's going on with the epidemic, that's the main focus of Congress legislation in the White House. But we need to recognize that cybersecurity needs to be our number 1 priority. And Washington, D.C. needs to start passing legislation to hold these entities accountable to implementing proper security.
So in terms of where the gaps are, what are the major gaps and what would need to be done to bridge those?
The first major gap is in accountability. It seems right now that the normal playbook is when an entity gets compromised, they blame others, they blame foreign adversaries, they blame foreign countries, but they never look in the mirror. So we need to have legislation that says if you don't secure and protect your assets, if you don't limit and control access from the internet, that you're going to be held liable and have significant fines. And this is not hard things to do. For example, you probably have in your bank or with your other e-commerce 2-factor authentication, where you're going in and you have an extra layer of protection. From what we can see, that was not in play here. It was just basic passwords. We also need to recognize that even though we need convenience, you should never be able to modify any of the settings remotely from the internet. That should only be done locally. And then finally, we need to have better automated monitoring in place and not rely on humans and luck to catch these attacks.
So none of those things seem terribly hard or complicated. Is that a correct understanding?
You are very smart in picking that up. They are not hard. They are not difficult. The problem is they are just not made a priority. They're always number 2, number 3, and they never get addressed. But that's the frustrating part from my standpoint. We have extreme exposure points in our country. These are going to continue to be compromised, and they're not difficult to fix. It's just people are not putting the effort and attention into it.
And so how much more vulnerable are we today compared to a year ago with all the remote working? And it seems like a lot of operations very quickly moved to offsite. So probably they weren't doing the security audits that they should have been. What's the situation?
We basically took a bad problem and made it very, very worse. Because if you go back to 2019, this attack could have happened, but it would have been a little harder. It might have taken a little more effort and a little more skill. So what we've done with the epidemic and the remote workforce has made it a lot easier and a lot simpler for these adversaries to break in. And the important thing to remember is this was caught because a human happened to look at the monitor. If they didn't look, we might not be having this conversation, and it might not have ever been caught. And an interesting data point is most systems in this country are compromised for 23 months before it's detected. So the probability that other water supplies and other critical infrastructure is compromised, and we just don't know about it because a human didn't get lucky and look at the monitor, is very, very, very high.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have to wrap up. We have about a minute left, but let me just ask you, as a result of this, has the conversation been elevated to a more critical level?
It has for 24 hours, and then it seems like it goes back to business as usual. So I keep hoping when these incidents occur, it's a wake-up call, but only time will tell.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And that's all for today's show. Thank you so much for watching The Nation Speaks. Join us every Saturday, 11 a.m. to noon Eastern. And from all of us here, have a great week.
Hi, we're happy to announce that you can also catch us on cable TV now. Millions of households already choose us as one of their trusted news sources, and you can too. You can watch us in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, and many other cities as well. And if your system doesn't carry NTD yet, you can just give them a quick call and request NTD on your cable provider. Thank you for watching. See you next time.